We've already discussed how cellular respiration can take sugars such as glucose and turn them into ATP. Now we're going to take another step in this cycle and look at how the plants originally take the energy from the sun and turn it into these sugars. Photosynthesis powers all of the life on Earth. All of the energy you eat originally came from plants, converting light into sugar. Plants that can do photosynthesis are called autotrophs. They are able to feed themselves. Auto means self, and trophic refers to food. When talking about food chains, we referred to these organisms as producers. The terms autotroph and producer are basically interchangeable. Animals and other organisms that cannot make their own food have to consume it. So they are called heterotrophs. The word hetero means different. This means that they get their fuel from an other outside source, something that is not themselves. When we studied food chains, we called these consumers and detritivores. There is a large diversity of photosynthetic autotrophs on our planet. The picture on the left shows the green plants of a forest. We also have underwater producers such as kelp in the middle picture. Kelp is not actually a plant, but a large algae. The picture on the right shows a cyanobacteria. These are single-cell bacteria cells that are capable of doing photosynthesis. The green parts of a plant are colored green because they contain the pigment molecules chlorophyll. This is the pigment that absorbs light for photosynthesis. Chlorophyll is found in the mesophyll cells of leaves. The picture on the left shows a cross-section of a leaf. This would be if you cut a leaf and looked into the side of it. You can see in the picture the top of the leaf here and the bottom of the leaf down here. Between the two layers are 2 layers of mesophyll cells. These cells are loosely arranged so that the gases can pass between them. The gases that come into and out of the cells are carbon dioxide and oxygen, and they enter and leave the leaf via holes in the bottom of the leaf called stroma, or stomata for plural. The stroma can open to allow gases through, but close typically when the weather is hot in order to conserve water loss. The image on the right is a close-up view of a chloroplast. Remember that this is the organelle that performs photosynthesis. The chloroplast had 2 outer membranes surrounding it. Inside is a large green membrane called the thylakoid membrane. It is arranged in stacks of green discs. I like to think of this stack as a stack of cookies, like the Thin Mints, the Girl Scout cookies. Each individual cookie, or disc, is called a thylakoid, and the entire stack of cookies, or discs, is called a granum. The thylakoid membrane is highly folded to have a large surface area. This is the location of the light reactions, the first step of photosynthesis. The large surface area of the thylakoid means that plants have a lot of space to capture light in their thylakoid membrane. Outside of the thylakoid, there is also a liquid called the stroma. Be very careful with the vocabulary here. A stoma is the opening on the bottom of a leaf. The stroma is the liquid inside the chloroplast that surrounds the thylakoid. The stroma liquid is the place of the second phase of photosynthesis called the Calvin cycle. Remember back to cell respiration. The very last step was when we gave electrons to oxygen and turned it into water. Well, photosynthesis, we're going to take everything we did in cell respiration and do it backwards. So instead of making water, we're going to break water. The very first step we're going to do is we're going to take water and split it. You can see the overall reaction of photosynthesis. Solar energy plus carbon dioxide plus water results in glucose and oxygen. This is the exact same equation as cellular respiration, except it's backwards. The products, right, the end products of cellular respiration are the reactants of photosynthesis. The very first thing that happens in photosynthesis is splitting water into hydrogens or electrons and oxygen. The oxygen is then released back into the atmosphere through the stoma. Scientists originally thought that the oxygen from photosynthesis was pulled off of the carbon dioxide molecule, but experiments were conducted with labeled oxygen to see where it came from. Labeled oxygen is just an isotope, so heavy oxygen with extra neutrons. When the oxygen was labeled in the carbon dioxide molecule, they showed up later in the glucose and some of the product waters. When oxygen was labeled in the water originally, the labeled oxygen showed up in the oxygen molecule. This means that oxygen was formed from splitting water molecules apart, not from the carbon dioxide. Leo the lion is back. Photosynthesis is also a redox reaction process. Let's review. Reduction is when a molecule gains an electron or a hydrogen. Hydrogens typically carry only one electron. Oxidation is when a molecule loses an electron. Thus, reduction and oxidation always occur together. When one molecule is oxidized, another molecule has to be reduced. So photosynthesis is a redox process. You can see on the bottom is the overall equation for photosynthesis. Light, energy, plus carbon dioxide, plus water, results in glucose and oxygen. Well, we know that the oxygen comes from the water. So, look at water. It has two hydrogens. Oxygen doesn't have any hydrogens. We can figure out if something was oxidized or reduced based on looking where the hydrogens are, because those are our electrons. So because water has hydrogens to begin with, and then oxygen does not, it has lost those electrons. So water becomes oxidized to oxygen. The opposite is true with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide doesn't have any hydrogens, but it gets transformed into glucose, which does have hydrogen. So it's gaining electrons in the form of hydrogen. And so because it gains electrons, it is reduced. The process of photosynthesis has two stages. The image shows a picture of a chloroplast. There's a green thylakoid on the left-hand side, and the right side is left empty to represent the stroma, the liquid outside the thylakoid. The first stage is called the light reactions. These occur on the thylakoid membrane. The only reactant that are needed for the light reaction is sunlight and water. The light reaction is going to use the energy from the sun to pull the electrons off of water. It uses this energy to make two new energy molecules. ATP, which we've seen before. ATP is our usable energy molecule. It's also going to give electrons to another electron shuttle, only this time it's called NADPH. The way I like to remember this is I think that the P is for photosynthesis. In cellular respiration, we had a similar molecule called NADH, no P. In photosynthesis, we're going to use the electron shuttle NADPH, P for photosynthesis. Eventually, the electrons that we pull off of water, right, those hydrogens, are going to end up on NADPH. The second stage of photosynthesis is called the Calvin cycle. This happens in the stroma. This is when carbon dioxide finally gets used. The carbon dioxide is fixed to an organic molecule, and then eventually that organic molecule is converted into glucose. This process is endergonic, meaning it requires energy. So the energy for the Calvin cycle comes from the ATP and the NADPH that we just made in the light reactions.